Now, as the world awaits for the ceasefire agreement to start, the United Nations says Gaza is the most dangerous place in the world to be a child. Agencies charged with helping women and children in conflict briefed members of the Security Council on Wednesday. It's reported that 5,300 Palestinian children have been killed since Israel began its bombing campaign in Gaza.
Today, the Gaza Strip is the most dangerous place in the world to be a child. No place is safe in the Gaza Strip, and the proposed zones do not have the infrastructure or protection measures in place to meet the needs of such large numbers of civilians. We are particularly concerned by reports of increasing numbers of displaced children who have been separated from their families along evacuation corridors to the south, or who are otherwise arriving unaccompanied to hospitals for medical care. These children are especially vulnerable, and they urgently need to be identified, provided with temporary care, and given access to family tracing and reunification services.
Now, Israeli forces have carried out a series of incursions in the occupied West Bank, killing at least one young Palestinian. Israeli operations included the deployment of snipers being conducted in several areas, from the Balata refugee camp in Nablus to the Al Arub camp near Hebron. Israeli forces have stepped up overnight raids and arrests in the occupied West Bank since the Hamas attack of October the 7th. For more on the war, let's bring in Arise special correspondent Karl Bostic, who joins us live from Tel Aviv. Good afternoon. Warm welcome to the program, Karl. Great to have you again. I'm going to get straight into it. What can you tell us about what may be behind the delay in releasing hostages? Of course, this was expected to start today. What has gone wrong?
Well, interestingly enough, last night, Israelis, they went to bed thinking that they'd be waking up today with news of hostages making their way into Israel, and instead it was anything but. Instead, now it's reported that at the earliest, it will be Friday, but not before Friday. And that's just because there are just so many moving parts to this. Negotiations going between Tel Aviv, Doha, Cairo, Rafah, and Gaza, of course. I mean, the sticking points include there's disagreement still up to the last minute over how many hostages are still being held in Gaza. There's a disagreement between Israel and Hamas over that. And then once you get past that point, it's then about which ones should be released and how they should be released. So, for example, going back to what I was referring yesterday, they were saying 30 children would be released, 8 mothers of children, and 12 elderly women, bringing the total to 50. Well, again, the problem is there are 38 children there. Where are the other 8 children? And if you're talking about how many hostages are in Gaza, we don't really know if they're all alive or not. That's why they put in language saying that Israel wants 50 living hostages. So we don't know where things stand in terms of, their conditions or who's alive. And then also, they're not all in one place, and they're not all held by Hamas. They're held in different locations. They're held by an Islamic Jihad group. So there's also the logistical problem of how do you gather these hostages together in one location, and how do you gather them safely to hand over either to the Red Cross or to Israel. And that's another issue right there, because it's unclear whether the Red Cross will take custody of them at all while in Gaza, or whether they'll have to wait into Rafah. And then there's a question over whether or not the Red Cross will be allowed access to the remaining hostages. Keep in mind, we're only talking 50 hostages. 180 are still remaining unaccounted for. So that's a real big concern. And then you mentioned the aid trucks. Up to 300 trucks a day are meant to be crossing the border, but they still can't even agree to the amount of aid that will be going on those trucks to Gaza. So there's a lot of moving parts right there. And then another thing also just to remember, the ones that make the final decision in signing off on the hostages, it's the inner circle of Hamas, and they are living underground, the tunnels in Gaza. Communications is very, very difficult. So people are not sitting in a room back and forth in Doha. They're communicating all these different locations and ultimately talking to people who basically are hiding in a tunnel underneath Gaza.
Right. Now, given all of these dynamics, is this indicative that there's possibly a risk that these talks could eventually break down?
Well, fortunately enough, there's a lot of guardrails in place to really ensure that something does happen in a positive sense. You've got the U.S., which is really the main broker. They're the ones who are the guarantor of this deal, the U.S. and Qatar. There's a lot at stake for the U.S. The U.S. has a lot of leverage over Israel, diplomatically and militarily. Israel, for example, wanted more than 50 released and the first group, and the U.S. and the White House with President Biden convinced them to accept 50 for now and work towards the remaining in the next phase. And similarly, Hamas wanted at least 5 days, and Qatar put pressure on them to accept 4 days. So you've got guarantors with a lot at stake between the U.S., especially Qatar, and then unofficially also Egypt. And President Biden, for his part, he's been on the phones with Qatar's the emir of Qatar, Sheikh Al Thani, and also Egypt's President Abdel Fattah Al Sisi on a regular basis throughout the week. So they're really engaged with this. That's why we'll see a result of some sort, but now there will be a delay.
Right now, very quickly, Karl, before you go, what are the implications on the strategies for both Hamas and Israel?
Very simply put, the longer this plays out is to Hamas's advantage, because they know that Israel's ultimate aim is to destroy and eliminate Hamas. So the longer they can prolong this, there's more. The longer that casualties keep rising from bombardments from Israel, there will be greater international concern, if not outrage, over the casualties, and there will be more calls internationally for Israel to end the war. And even the U.S. is warning them, we can't protect you if you keep, bombing in a relentless way that takes so many civilian casualties. So in other words, if Hamas can prolong this, there could actually be international pressure to end the war. But Israel, for its part, they want to still prosecute this war, even if it means going into South Gaza and, again, increasing its bombardment, even though now most of the population of 2.3 million are now in South Gaza. So there's a lot of uncertainty at stake. This is a very high stakes right now.
Absolutely, and we do hope that optimism doesn't wane in the meantime. Arise special correspondent Karl Bostic, thank you so much for your contribution today.